Hi, I'm so happy to have you here. My name is Annika. Today I wanted to talk about creativity and self-expression a little bit. I've been making an active effort to increase my creative drive and to just kind of do it in a more methodical and consistent manner. I'm editing and I realized I completely forgot to actually mention why I decided to do this video in the first place, and I think that's kind of important because it's part of this larger kind of cultural discussion that was happening a while back with this TikTok. I'll put it up.
Some of you guys have not read a book in years, don't know how to do your taxes, have no sense of identity outside of the internet, and can't speak in public, and yet every morning, there you are looking at yourself in your full-length IKEA mirror going, "You're so hot. You're the prettiest girl in the world." Okay, and? Even if that were true, and let's be honest, who cares? Spell Pharaoh. Tell me what the FTC does. Name a single hobby of yours outside of media consumption. Exactly. Not hot.
So I'm sure many of you have seen it because it was making the rounds on Twitter and obviously TikTok as well. And the thing is, everything she says is such a read. She's so correct about everything that she said. But specifically the line, "name a hobby of yours outside of media consumption," resonated with a lot of people. Like, a lot of people felt so called out by that. And I think it also kind of inspired a lot of people to take up more creative hobbies. That's basically why I got inspired to make this video. So I just wanted to share that and kind of provide some context. First, I'm going to give a little background on my own journey with creativity and self-expression. And I'm going to be talking about reasons why you should take up creativity as an active thing in your life. And I feel like many of us know the benefits of creativity, but I also think many people have quite a surface level understanding of it, because often we get taught the importance of certain things but no one truly explains it in depth. And I feel like because of that lack of depth, we often find advice pertaining to things like this quite cheesy. You know, it's something that's always advocated for but no one explains it in enough depth, really. And I'm going to be talking about pros and cons of different mediums in quite a systematic sense, I feel. In a certain sense, we all know what different mediums are capable of and what they're best suited for, but, you know, I've always found that it helps to have someone verbalize it properly. In relation to that, I'm also going to be talking about how suitable they are for self-expression. Creativity and self-expression, contrary to popular belief, are, I think, linked, but not the same thing. There are quite a few of these abstract concepts which I feel people don't really give enough thought to, and they just kind of group them into one idea. Then I'm going to be talking about something that I've talked about on my channel beforehand, but I feel it is important to mention it in this video as well, because I think every video should be able to stand on its own without you having to go and watch my other videos. I'm going to be talking about where you can find sources of inspiration and how you can transmute that into a creative work. Before I talk about my own self-expression, I'm going to talk about my creative journey a little bit. From a very, very early age, I had kind of an affinity for drawing. You know, I was better at it than most children my age. Not that I was some master or anything, but I was that kid who used to draw in class. I mean, thankfully for me, a lot of my teachers kind of realized that it actually helped me focus on what was going on. Because as I've mentioned before, pretty sure I have undiagnosed ADHD. I'm getting that checked out, so I'm not self-diagnosing, but it's a suspicion. It's not just my suspicion, many other teachers have actually told me that as well, so. But I've always been labelled a creative, and it wasn't even really my main hobby for a lot of my life. I used to read a lot as well for quite a while, but people used to kind of boil me down to my artistic ability, which is a little funny because I wasn't that good, but it's the kind of thing where all your relatives who don't really know you very well used to just get me so many art supplies, and I still have a bunch of those because you don't go through them that quickly, you know? I didn't know much about art save for technique. I was mostly, you know, I was admiring other contemporary artists' art, but it was more so in a very pop culture sense. I knew absolutely nothing really about the theory of art or art history. This label was kind of put on me, and you know, I accepted that because I thought it was kind of cool to be a creative, even though it was something I wasn't engaging with critically, which, you know, in all fairness, I was like a teenager, so I feel like that's completely normal. But because of that, I tied my identity to that quite heavily, and I did GCSE art. GCSEs are the qualifications we get when we are 15 to 16 in the UK. I did pretty good on that, but I never actually got to do my final assignment, and I never finished my sketchbook because COVID hit, which was fine by me. You know, I know it was a horrible time for many people, but I had a great time personally. But then time for sixth form came, which is kind of like the high school diploma equivalent. You do your A-levels. And I did A-level art, and it took up a lot of my time. I found myself gravitating a lot towards realism and semi-realism. I did both my GCSE and A-level art on cyberpunk and AI respectively before the whole AI craze, which I kind of regret having such a positive take on AI at the time, but I was mostly talking about AI in terms of its portrayal in cyberpunk films. That's what I found myself being good at the time. That's what I was able to engage with in quite a meaningful manner. But then, you know, I came to university, I did a completely different degree. I did Japanese studies, and it took me 2 years to be able to create a single piece of art after that. I found that this is a very common occurrence with anyone who does art academically. The fact that it's not a passion anymore, and that you have to stick to a very rigid guideline of what to create, what to paint, what to draw, it saps any urge and any fun you would have from it normally. In terms of self-expression, on a very abstract level, I did know that art was self-expression in a lot of ways, but at the same time, it's not something that I thought about very often. It's not something I engaged with properly, really. You know, it's fine to create art in more of a pop culture sense, but at the same time, I felt like I was missing out on something. And I think a large part of that was just a lack of knowledge about how to go about something to express the self, and kind of the importance of expressing the self through artwork. It's not something that I've heard a lot of people dive into, even though I feel like it's a very important conversation. I don't know if this is just knowledge that everyone was born with, well, not born with, but everyone has just kind of picked up over the years, or if, you know, people are just not really thinking about things that deeply, which, you know, fair enough. Also, I think a large contributing factor at the time was my inability to define myself, and to a certain extent I do feel that definitions of the self are limiting, but I think it is also crucial to have a solid concept of self, because for a long time I didn't really know many of my traits. I would have to, you know, ask other people to be able to tell me my traits, or well, I knew my interests, but I didn't really know how they would link into me or why I liked them. And I think it's just this kind of thoughtful analysis which is really necessary to be able to understand the self and to be able to express it in a kind of nuanced and effective manner. Also, you know, it's important to also consider the fact that as a teenager you are changing everything about yourself very suddenly. You know, your tastes change as you learn more. A lot of people base their identity off other people's impressions of them, which, you know, I feel like I don't need to tell you that that's not a great idea, per se. Nowadays, I think it's really fun to defy other people's expectations, actually, but there was a point in time when I was scared to try anything different because of it not kind of aligning with other people's view of me. And I mentioned earlier that creativity and self-expression are not the same thing inherently, but I do think creativity through certain mediums can be a vessel for your self-expression and your projection of yourself into the world. And that's what I found myself doing, or at least trying to do. You know, it's still something that I'm working on personally. I haven't mastered it yet. I'm not coming here and trying to, you know, preach at everyone to follow my lead, because I'm right there alongside you. It's just something I've been thinking of a lot lately. I'm gonna get into reasons why to create. Gonna get the obvious one out of the way first. It's very relaxing and very satisfying to be able to create something from your own mind. And honestly, depending on what medium you choose, it can be for next to no money. I'm sure you don't need me to tell you, but some mediums do require a bit more of a financial investment to, be able to buy the materials in the first place. At the same time, you can create art with anything if you try hard enough. As I just said, it also does help in understanding yourself a lot, whether it be through you reflecting on your works and what you liked, what you didn't like, or maybe the inspiration that you are incorporating into your work. If you follow the path of creating what you want to create or what you like to see, I think the things you find beauty in and the things you take inspiration from are a direct reflection of yourself and your interests. Through that, I think there is quite a lot of wisdom to be gained about the self. Actually, going back to the pride in your work thing, mastery in a craft or in a medium of art, form of creation, is a huge source of self-confidence. It's something you have invested in your life. It's a skill. It's something you have taught yourself, ostensibly, or maybe, someone taught you, but it is a form of self-improvement nonetheless. Self-improvement is always incredibly satisfying to look back on. It's just a very enjoyable form of learning, really. Mastery takes a lot of time and a lot of discipline. It's kind of the same satisfaction that you get out of, your hard work paying off. But it's not hard work, because if you genuinely have a passion for it, and you should have passion for it if you are not being forced to do it by school, for example, an institution, work, whatever. If you're not monetizing it, then also if you are creating work that is wholly to serve you, if it's incorporating your interests, your inspirations, your likes, your ideas, really. Next point is it helps you appreciate art and crafts more. And I think in this very consumerist society, not to get into capitalism and economics too much, because I'm gonna be honest, don't know too much about it, but I know enough to be able to speak on this. But we are in a hyper-consumerist society in the West. I'm not in the West right now, but it still applies here in Japan. Which, by the way, side note, I'm probably not going to be here for very long. Because we have grown up in an environment where everything is available to us so easily, like at the click of a couple of buttons, and because we are constantly being marketed things, I think our conception of art and of crafts, and I think a very good example of this is fashion. These very time-consuming activities have completely warped our perception of these formerly artisanal crafts. And there's kind of a reason why our view of these have been warped completely. We have absolutely no patience for anything anymore, and I think as a result of that, we also value our things so much less. And I think, logically speaking, I think a lot of people know that these things used to cost so much in the past because they require a lot of hard work and a lot of discipline to be able to get to a point where you can create these, for instance, masterful gowns, masterful dresses, where you can sew or paint or do anything really to a good enough level to be able to sell. And I think immersing yourself in that world of creation does give you more of an appreciation for crafts and for kind of the objects you own. And you should be appreciating what you own, because I think it is a moral obligation to cultivate your taste and what is surrounding you, really. And I think many people fill their lives with shit, really. And I am entirely guilty of this. And we don't really show gratitude for what we have, and I think a large part of that lack of gratitude is because we don't understand the effort and the time that has gone into creating it. And I think engaging in these creative hobbies and creative acts is incredibly important if you care at all about sustainability. Under consumption core, which is like why I have my own thoughts about that, I'm not going to get into that, but basically if you care at all about the planet, and it's not even to do with the planet really, it's about your own attitude towards items in your life, and not even items, but I think the attitude that we display towards our items also gets reflected onto the people we interact with, so it's also a social problem. The last reason for creation is back to self-expression, because I know many other people who are just like this, but I personally have a very hard time with verbal expression most of the time. Now, this, currently, talking in front of a camera is fine for me, but that's mostly because I'm fairly used to it, I've done it before, and also I am not talking to an actual person, I'm just monologuing. There's no real social pressure here, and also I can edit out if I mess up with my words, which I do very often, so just keep that in mind. I'm not good at speaking very well. Expressing our deeper and more not embarrassing, but our more vulnerable emotions is incredibly hard verbally. Sometimes I can't even get the words out because I don't know how to explain it, especially because often if you're talking to someone face to face, it's something that you have to come up with off the bat. Through art, you can kind of refine that expression to be as accurate as you would need it to be, and also it is kind of a layer between you and, for instance, the viewer, the reader, the consumer of whatever art you are making. It is this layer of beauty, and I don't mean beauty in a physical sense, I mean it more in I think art is a filter you put over your emotions to be able to stand slightly apart from it and to make that expression a bit more easier. I would say it's like rose-colored glasses, but also I don't think that art necessarily needs to be conventionally beautiful. I think beauty is also tied with poignancy, and kind of an accurate portrayal of expression or emotion is also beautiful to me. This one is a bit harder to explain just because it is more of an abstract idea. And I'm thinking back currently to this Hosier interview that was done by Brittany Broski, and in it I think he talks about how he writes in a very poetic style. He talks about how he writes in this incredibly beautiful and poetic style, not because he wants to make it, inaccessible, even though I don't think it is, like, you have genius, come on. But more so because these metaphors and these references are able to convey something that he cannot in ordinary words in a conversation with another person. And that really resonated with me. That's exactly what I'm talking about here. There is this mastery that leads to an ease of communication between in this case, artist and the listener. I hope that made sense. I really do. But I'm gonna get into just my thoughts on different mediums, kind of pros and cons, how suited they are for self-expression, on my list here. So I have kind of grouped as many forms of creation as I could think of into basically the 4 different senses that we have. Wait, no, 5. The 5 different senses we have, because that's how we interact with the world, really. But I also put writing and poetry into a separate category because I feel like I don't think writing and poetry is a visual art. I don't think you can class it as that, even though you read with your eyes, but it's more of a linguistic art. I'm just going to list the categories and then I'm going to talk about how suitable they are for this expression. So in terms of sight, we have, all types of fine arts. We have film, photography, fashion I would also class as a visual art, but it does also come under the next category, which is touch. Sight is very interesting because oftentimes our perceptions of what we see are altered by the context in which we see them, social context, historical context, and I think a lot of times it takes quite a while of looking at something and analysing something for it to be easily understood by the average person. I think art can cater to the average person, but I'm talking more about, for instance, things that you would see in a museum. And for that, I think you do actually need to have just a baseline understanding of the kind of value of visual art. And I think you need to know about like fundamental techniques and just a base understanding of art history, which is slightly upsetting sometimes. But if you want a recommendation of a book, it's over there, but I'm not going to go get it. It's Ways of Seeing by John Berger, I'm not quite sure about that. Because a lot of the times I feel like art passes over a lot of people's heads if they don't know anything about it, which is genuinely quite sad. Which is why I think, put more money into arts, please. Because you need to be able to critically engage with art. It is a huge thing, it's a huge factor, all these fundamental techniques, they all evoke different ideas, and I think art movements are incredibly important to know about. I mean, I have a very baseline understanding of some art movements. I'm not, an expert by any means, but just kind of the general motivations and the themes of these artworks are so are often quite crucial because art draws on other art, which draws on other art. So you need to be able to understand these inspirations to be able to understand what the art is getting at. And mind you, not all art specifically has a deeper meaning, but art evokes certain ideas in people. I do highly recommend that book that I had just mentioned. It's just a guide to like critical thinking about how framing and context and medium kind of affect what you see and how that still translates into modern day things such as advertising. You see a bunch of art references in advertising. In terms of self-expression, I think art is less accessible than writing, which I'm going to get into, but I do think art can also often be more emotive and more visceral than writing can, because it's something you can directly experience instead of imagining it yourself. And I think art is a fairly inexpensive way to create. Obviously, it depends on what medium of art you're trying to do. I'm talking more like fine art, like you can sketch with a pencil and paper. Anyway, onto touch. I think fashion and textiles were the main ones I could think of. I don't really have much experience with textiles, but I do with fashion. Fashion is such a beautiful, beautiful way of, you know, creating. I think fashion also requires quite a lot of financial investment because, you know, on a very baseline level, you need a sewing machine. If you don't want to hand sew, but you know, that's like minimum £100 for a decent one. And then obviously material costs quite a lot. The learning curve is a bit hard, if I'm being honest with you, but it is doable, I think. And I think you also don't necessarily have to like sew your own clothes. I think you can also kind of paint, you can embroider. There are so many ways to customize your clothes which don't involve this constant buying of clothes to be able to create new outfits with. But I think this combination of visuals and touch is so just genuinely, it's beautiful because it's interactive and it's sensual. Fabrics have different effects and it's really fun to learn about. I think it is a bit more difficult than other creative mediums to get into though. In terms of sound, obviously music. I'm gonna be completely honest with you. I do not know a single thing about music. I've always been supremely untalented in the field of music. I did like mandatory violin for 2 years and I never practiced because it sounded so bad. And my mum would always tell me to shut up when I tried to practice, so I do think music and rhythm and the quite common incorporation of lyrics, I think that can be just as emotive or even more emotive than art, and I think it is also a lot more accessible than fine arts. But I do think this combination of music being quite universally understood, like the feelings that it creates, and you don't need to understand music theory to be able to understand music the way you need to maybe understand art theory a little bit. The fact that music often has lyrics is a way for it to be more accessible to just the general public, because I feel like most people can read, you know, and obviously there is a matter of how complicated and how dense the writing is, but even then I think it is much more easier to get a grasp of kind of what emotions and what ideas it's trying to portray than in visual arts. And obviously visual arts also has a whole spectrum of how obvious it is in like expression, but you know, you get it. In terms of taste, we have various things like cooking, bartending, those like coffee loving guys, which I keep seeing. Coffee is a very kind of hipster hobby for me, but a good chunk of my family is actually in the coffee business, and they're quite good at it, you know, like good job. They're actually in like the coffee roasting business, and I'm not going to tell you who, but one of my cousins was the world champion. Not I'm flexing about my cousin, I don't even talk to them that much, but I do like them. I've always found cooking and kind of taste-based hobbies, like more creative hobbies, so interesting. I would personally never get into coffee, but whenever I went there, I saw just how much work goes into genuinely like refining your taste, your ability to taste. And because, you know, that refinement is necessary, I feel like it's not the most accessible, but I think also, for instance, cooking, also there is that aspect of the visual element of it. I think it's a very unique form of expression, and I think more people should take it up, even though it requires a bit more kind of development of your own ability to sense. Like, again, back to the coffee thing, like I went into the roastery one day and, you know, I had a little tour, and the guy who was sat at the coffee machine was kind of showing me this really deeply complicated graph of like heat temperatures and what like flavors it would evoke, which was so mesmerizing to me. I would love to be able to learn that. It's kind of the art of subtlety, really. I think it's really nice that we have taken something that is like a basic human necessity, like food and drink, and we've turned it into art forms. I think that's really fun, and it's really, I don't know, it's very human for us to do that. The children yearn for beauty and art. What can I say? In terms of smell, pretty much the same thing applies with perfume. I love perfume so deeply. I do think perfume creation is quite difficult to get into, just because of the processes that it has to go through. It is very processed. I think different forms of perfumery, like for instance candles or like wax-based perfumes, are more easy to figure out, but also requires a lot more investment, I think, than for instance cooking does. Cooking, I think, also is a great example of something that can be creative without being a form of self-expression. For instance, cooking for your loved ones is a way of creating something out of raw ingredients, but it is not necessarily an expression. And I think it can be interpreted as an expression, but I think many people go into it without any thought of that, really. I think that is possible with pretty much all of these, really. I think all of these mediums can be done thoughtlessly, which is why I think creation and self-expression are different spheres. And I'm gonna get to language, which is currently my favorite format of self-expression, because it is language is the primary form of communication between people, and I think self-expression is, in essence, a two-way communication between the creator and the receiver, ? Whatever the audience is in this situation. I think writing is the most logical, and because it is the primary form of communication, it is also the most accessible to most people. And I do think that the reader also partakes in the creation as they read, because they are, imagining something in their mind. But you also have to think about how this creation of an image through writing is one layer removed from, for instance, visual art. For instance, like writing gives you the context and it describes it beautifully, but it is words on a page. Whereas I think visual art is often more vague, but more kind of easily understood. If you get it, you get it. Basically, I think if you get art, then it's more easy to feel emotions through fine arts. But if you don't, I think writing is a lot easier. I think visual art is often more emotive, but also more abstract, is what I'm trying to say. There's less of a guaranteed chance of the viewer understanding than there is of a reader understanding. Because when you talk about expression and art, I think you also have to consider the audience in it. On the one hand, there is what you intended by your work, and on the other hand, it's how it is received and how it is interpreted by the audience. And that is just as valid as the intentions that you have gone into this work with. I think with writing, the audience interprets a scene, for instance, whereas with art, the audience interprets context. And it's just a matter of personal preference. You have to just think of how you have to consider accessibility and kind of the effects it will create in the person's mind. I think just basically some mediums take more understanding of the medium and more careful thought to be able to decipher a meaning from them. I'm going to talk about sources of inspiration next. I know people say that you can get inspiration from anywhere. I think you also need to be explained to about how to actually do that, because I think you know, it is true. It is, but I think it's a very surface level explanation of how to find inspiration. Obviously, you can gain inspiration from other works, even from works in different mediums. So the experiences you have, the things you see in your daily life, motifs, etc., etc. Anything can be inspiration. And it's not as easy as you would like it to be. It's something that requires a bit more thinking. Basically, you just need to start thinking. You need to start pondering about, I don't know, like the light coming through your curtains, or like the motifs you have read in your book. You need to think about why you are drawn to these things. And if you're not really naturally drawn to ideas, then I think you need to actively seek out things that you like, and you need to interrogate why, or like which aspects of this thing or idea you are enjoying. And once you get kind of good at that, you can try, you know, paying active attention to things that happen in your life and how they reflect things that you enjoy. I think also another way to do this is if you take something and you are able to remove it from its context and strip it of its meanings that, you know, you have been taught to associate with it, you can think of what it can represent in a very symbolic sense. Like the curtains. If I take away the meaning of these curtains in front of me, they're very gauzy, it's very veil-like, it represents a transition, it represents secrecy. It's this border between the outside and me. It's a transitional object, really. And then you can start pondering about how that could be interpreted in your work. You can think about how this partial obscurity of, for instance, my living space, how that can be represented in artwork or in writing or anything really. And then you can take aspects of the object, for instance this gauziness, and you can relate it to other things that you see around you, like for instance the clouds up there. They are just as kind of transparent and they are shifting with the wind, just like these curtains in front of me. You know, and then it's these connections that you have to make, and it's something that you have to do consciously instead of waiting for inspiration to find you, because it's not really going to if you don't put effort into it. It's something you have to train your brain to do. And I think part of being an artist is this ability to reshape the world in a way that inspires you, in a way that suits your interests, really. And it's similar to romanticization, really, but it is something that you have to put active effort into because it doesn't come easily, at least not to me. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I don't know whether this is a bit of a longer video, it seems to be from the amount of time that I've been filming. But a lot of these things are quite hard to explain, but I tried my best, I promise, okay? I promise. Life update, may not be in Japan very long, because I'm very depressed here. My depression's coming back and I think I've developed anxiety from being here, which is like so embarrassing. Not that anxiety is embarrassing. Shout out anxious women and men. Men can be anxious too. After feeling like this a while though, I do have to say I think what a goofy mental illness, because why do I feel like I'm gonna like vomit and shit myself when I'm asked a question in Japanese and I don't know like one word in it, like. Anyway. Also, I don't really like my degree that much, but it is what it is. You know, don't call me a coward for not staying. I can't create in this environment. I can't romanticize anything. It's so bad. And that's on depression and not being medicated, because I can't afford health insurance here. No, it's fine though. It's fine, like genuinely, it's fine. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any ideas on what I can talk about, I'm more than happy to talk about basically anything. I'm so happy to talk about anything, okay? I think my next video is going to be on how to develop your personal style. And it's obviously going to be somewhat similar to ideas in this video, but I have some valuable insights, okay? I have thoughts that I need to share with the world so bad. Okay, thank you so much for watching. I love you.